Efren and David raced to their first class after the ASB meeting ended. Mr. Garrett was not someone to mess with. Rumor had it that he was the only teacher at school to ever send an entire classroom to the principal's office. All at one time. The strange thing about Mr. Garrett was that he wasn't always like this. Last year, during the sixth grade Renaissance Assembly, the principal, Mr. Carey, introduced him as the district's Teacher of the Year. Mr. Garrett ran up to the stage, high fiving kids on his way. Everyone in the gymnasium stood and cheered. Mr. Garrett was all smiles that day and seemed like a totally different person. Since Mr. Garrett taught only honors history, Efren knew he'd be having him the following year. Efren couldn't wait. Only something happened to him. It was as if a gray cloud swept down and planted itself right over Mr. Garrett's classroom and never left. He just didn't look happy anymore. Efren entered the classroom first. Unlike others around the school, this room stood bare, without any cheesy history teacher posters or bright bulletin boards highlighting student learning. Not here. Nada. Even Mr. Garrett's desk was bare. Just the usual oversized mug of Starbucks coffee. Not waiting for the bell, Efren began copying down the homework. Article of the day, same as yesterday. Everyone opened their assigned Chromebooks and began logging in. Mr. Garrett took his usual seat behind his desk. You all know the drill. Work on the typing tutorial if you finish early. With that, he went back to the same book of Sudoku puzzles from a week ago. Just as Efren positioned his fingers across the keyboard, a crumbled sheet of paper struck the back of his head. There was no need to look around or track the path it came from. This was just the way David preferred to communicate during class. Efren spread the paper across the desk, ironing it out as best as he could. This particular note was an illustration or a masterpiece, as David liked to call them. The artwork on the page showed Mr. Garrett slumped over his desk with his face soaking in a pool of drool. A stick figure girl stood behind him with her finger resting inside her triangle nose. The speech bubble above her said, "You forgot to assign us homework." It could only be one girl, Jennifer Huerta, David's new political enemy. Efren pressed down on his temples and buried the drawing under his Chromebook. He then turned back and shook his head at wide-grinning David. As much as he loved hanging around with David, Efren chose to spend his morning nutrition breaks at his favorite place at school, the library. Like his bathtub at home, it was a place where he could open a book and let himself be taken anywhere he wanted. Here, Efren felt free. Here, there was never anyone he needed to bathe or help with homework. Here, he didn't have to take on security watch and sit by his apartment window at night waiting for Amma to make it home safely from work. Here it was all about his escaping into other worlds where everything usually ended up in smiles. Efren unzipped his backpack and took out the books he tucked away at the bottom. He then slipped them into the weathered, empty Amazon box marked "Return," seated outside the library door. He stepped inside and greeted Miss Ornelas, the only school librarian in the entire world with a habit of talking louder than the students. She looked up from her messy desk and waved with a smile. Of course, Efren smiled back as he headed towards the fiction area. Second row, top shelf. The same exact spot he left off the last time he went here. Without missing a beat, he began running his fingers along the spine of each book until something called to him, and something always did. This time, his fingers paused over a teal book with orange letters. The House on Mango Street. He thought about Highland Street, about the fruit trees, and for a split second, wondered if this book might somehow be about his own neighborhood. He pictured little kids in diapers chasing chickens running around freely, while slightly older kids played school on the porch or made mud pies to share with their entire neighborhood. Yeah, right, Efren scoffed at the idea. That's an amazing book, a voice said behind him. It was Jennifer Huerta, the only other student who checked out as many books as Efren. She stood beside him, her long, wavy hair held tightly in a braid. It's about a girl named Esperanza trying to discover who she is and where she belongs in the world. It's my favorite book ever, Jennifer said, clutching a Lord of the Rings book to her chest. Efren's eyes went wide. Really? Yeah, the girl in it sounds a lot like me, even uses Spanglish once in a while. Efren cringed. My fifth grade teacher, Miss O'Neill, used to get mad if we spoke that way in class. Why? What's it to her? Efren liked this side of Jennifer. She had a bit of an attitude he hadn't seen before. I don't know, maybe because she couldn't understand what we were saying? Jennifer laughed and surprised Efren. They'd been in the same honors classes since last year, and he'd never heard her laugh before. What's your favorite book? She asked. Probably Maniac McGee. Maniac McGee? I haven't read that one. Yep, it's amazing. It's about this kid stuck between two different worlds that don't get along just because of the color of their skin. And at the end, he actually, sorry, don't want to spoil it for you. Oh, don't worry about me. I always read the endings first. Wait, what? Yeah, I like to read the endings first. That way I know that there's a happy ending. Otherwise, the books are too suspenseful for me, and I bite my fingernails until the tips begin to hurt. She laughed. I'll probably have to wear gloves on the school's election day. Efren's mouth decided to betray him. I'm sure you'll do great, he blurted out. Oh, thanks, Jennifer answered a look of surprise on her face. But I don't have any hopes. I don't have my hopes up too high. So why are you running? I was home watching a report on how undocumented families were being separated. They had kids in cages like animals, and that really hurt. She looked back at Efren. You ever buy eggs at the store? Yeah, sometimes. Ama sends me out to the corner market whenever we're out. You ever notice the labels? Efren shook his head. Most of the eggs say they come from cage free chickens, which means people in this country worry more about chickens than they do about undocumented children. It makes me feel so. Her eyes welled up and she stopped to look around and made sure nobody else was close enough to hear her. Then, with her head down as if she was ashamed, she added, Mi mamá no tiene papeles. Don't worry, my parents are illegals too, I swear. I won't tell anyone. Jennifer smiled ever so tightly. I know you won't. That's why I told you. My mom says I'm a great judge of character. Says I'd make a great juez someday and I'll have my own courtroom. She reached into her backpack and held out a brown paper lunch bag. The words Somos Semillitas were neatly written across the front. We are seeds, I don't get it. It's a Mexican saying. Nos quisieron enterrar, pero no sabían que éramos semillas. Efren rubbed his lower lip. They tried to bury us, but they didn't know we were seeds. Yeah, that's it. My mom likes to remind me of this every day. She's right, though. That's why I'm running. Figured I could make a difference, even if just at school. Efren smiled widened. I like it. I think your mom is right. You make a great politician. She laughed. Well, I think you make a great school president. Efren's cheeks turned bright red. Thanks, but I'm just campaigning for David. Too bad. Losing wouldn't hurt as much if you were against someone like you. If it were against someone like you. Again, Efren's mouth continued on autopilot. I think you make a great president. Immediately, he covered his mouth with his hand. Jennifer smiled and pulled her bright pink rolling backpack in close to her. I better go, she said. Han is waiting for me. But before leaving, she leaned in and gave him a quick hug before vanishing behind the next aisle. Efren directed his gleaming eyes back at the book in his hand. His ears perked up. We didn't always live on Mango Street. He leaned up